Hey there, Greeley. This is the Locals Only podcast. My name is Jamie Eklund, and I'm your host. I'm a local business person and real estate agent here in Greeley. And we have James Clifford on again. Welcome, James. Thanks for being on with us.
Well, thanks for having me, Jamie. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So, James is with Guild Mortgage. He's a local lender. And today we're going to kind of give an overview of what we are observing with the real estate market today. James is going to talk the lending side, rates, and any future stuff that he knows about. And I'm going to talk about the housing side, the inventory and the demand, and kind of what I'm seeing and what we predict as far as we can predict, which is probably to the end of the week, which it's Friday. And so, I feel pretty confident I can predict until the end. So. James, let's go ahead and start with you. What are you seeing out there right now? What kind of deals are you closing more of? What kind of buyers are you seeing typically right now?
You know, I, I'm seeing kind of a cross section of a lot of different buyers, but primarily what I'm seeing is a lot of first time home buyers, which is encouraging. We've got some people that need to move. That's the other segment for various reasons. Typically, that's going to be for work or for I've just outgrown my home and I can't wait any longer. Or people that are feeling comfortable with just making that switch now, especially with the market being a little slower. They like to take their time for decisions and all that stuff. So those are kind of the three different people groups from a very high level that I'm seeing are taking the plunge.
Yeah, it is encouraging to see first time home buyers getting out there. Um, I mean, interest rates historically are not super high, but over the last, I don't know, 10 years maybe, they
Hmm.
do seem to be pretty high. And it comes down to affordability, really. It's like, what can somebody afford? And the two major factors are going to be the purchase price of the home and the interest rate on the mortgage. And with interest rates fairly high, with purchase price also fairly high,
Hmm.
seeing first time home buyers is encouraging. I like that.
Yeah. And when I'm talking with my first time home buyers, really I try to stress something is yes, interest rates are important, but what's more important is your budget.
Yeah.
Because you could purchase a house at 2% and it not fit in your budget. And that situation is worse than a 7% or an 8% interest rate that fits in your budget. So it comes down to budget and affordability, buffer room too. Make
Yeah.
sure you have buffer room in your budget because
Yeah.
inflation is a thing.
Yeah. Well, and it seems like in any market, we're going to get people that are motivated, people that they're getting a divorce or
Mhm.
it's an estate deal where, the parents died and they have to sell the house. That's more on the sales side and not on the buy side. But, we're
Mhm.
always going to see the people that are motivated and there's no matter, it doesn't matter what the market is, they have to buy or sell a house.
Yeah.
And so we're certainly seeing those people here today. Are you seeing more people that maybe they were waiting for interest rates and they were riding the fence and now they're coming out and saying, "Yeah, okay, we're tired of this. We got to buy something." You're
I'm
seeing
starting to
more of
see that.
those?
Yeah, I am. I'm starting to see more and more of that. Not a huge
Yeah.
amount, but noticeably more. So I'm seeing that trend and that's starting to tick up where they're just like, okay, we've we've seen what the new normal is. We all thought it was going to interest rates were going to come down a lot faster than they are.
Yeah.
Let's just make the move and they're a lot more at ease now than they used to be.
So do you think the reason why they're coming out of the woodwork now a little bit more is because it's just been long enough? We've been in the, above 6% for a 30-year fixed rate loan. We've been there for what, 2.5 years
At
now, two
least, yeah.
years at least,
Yeah.
and so it's been long enough that they're just getting impatient. Is there something else that's kind of triggering some of them?
That's a good question. I think there's probably a mixture. I think there's some people that are just impatient. They're like, we're done waiting.
Yeah.
There's some people that can't afford to wait, because I've just added two more kids, or and I need the more space, or job change, or got a big promotion at work, so now I can actually afford to take you know
Sure.
uh, to make that change. And then there's I think some people that are just, it's the shock is gone, or not as pronounced as it was when we were so spoiled with twos and threes, that
Yeah.
I think people are now saying, okay, you told me it wasn't going to go down that low. Now I more believe you. So let's just deal with the current situation as it is.
Yeah. Well, and I find it kind of interesting thinking through, and everybody's different. Everybody's got their own reasons.
Hmm.
But I do think there is some groups of people that their salary is starting to kind of catch up to
Yeah.
the affordability piece, and now
Hmm.
they can kind of make it happen. And so I've seen a few of those people too. One of the things that I'm seeing a lot of right now is a lot of people that have a house to sell. Now they're also buying. And
Hmm.
obviously, there for a while, people are like, look, I've got a 2 or 3% interest rate on my mortgage. There's no way I'm going to get rid of that and trade it in for a 6.5% or something. Now there's more people that are willing to do that because of their
Hmm.
living situation. They just realize that they got to get out of the house for whatever reason. Maybe
Yeah.
it's the location, maybe the house isn't big enough, maybe the house is too big. Maybe it just doesn't have the amenities that they want out of a house, and so they're trading that in for something different, even though it comes with a higher mortgage.
Hmm. Well, and also too, to your point there, I think some people are starting to realize if they are sitting on a lot of equity, that usually translates either into a more sizable down payment. So the payment difference is not quite as big as what they thought it would be. Still, it's going to be different, obviously, especially if you're upgrading. But also, too, people are looking at the possibility of, if I sell my home, then I have a sizable down payment and I could wipe out a lot of my debts. So my
Mm.
total net cash flow is actually pretty close to what it currently is right now. So upgrade house, get rid of some debts. Maybe that's not such a bad idea after all. So I think people are starting to not fixate just on interest rates, but if they take that time, they're seeing the bigger financial picture.
Yeah, and I mean, we've worked a few deals together where even though they're trading in a 3% mortgage for a 6.5% or whatever. Actually, we usually buy that down, but let's
Hmm.
say it would be a 6.5. They're paying off enough other debt that it actually is reducing their monthly payments, which is pretty
Yeah,
awesome.
I just closed a deal last month that big picture, they got a little bit more expensive house. They definitely did an upgrade, but I was saving them $1,200 a month because we used a lot of the equity to knock off a lot of debt. They have much better cash flow situation, and their goals of the house were realized all in one fell
Yeah.
swoop.
Well, and I think, you back up the financial picture and, after COVID, a lot of people got in, they bought houses, and a lot of people bought houses they weren't happy with
Hmm.
because they were desperate. They had to get something, and this is just the house that they could get. And so they bought
Yep.
it. And then they were planning on buying something down the road, but then interest rates went up. But not just interest rates, everything went up, right? Inflation really took a big, sizable chunk out of
Hmm.
people, and now all of a sudden, people are struggling to make their monthly payments on things. And so they start to finance that with credit cards. And,
Yep.
they have their car loans are high, everything's high. And so now we're starting to see a lot more of those people say, you know what? If we actually do buy a house, we could actually pull that equity out of the house we have now and actually reduce our monthly payment to something that's a little bit more comfortable,
Hmm.
which is kind of interesting. It's something that I haven't seen since I've been a real estate agent. It's a very unique market in that regard. But from my perspective as a real estate agent too, like I said, a lot of people are getting contingent deals done. And what I mean by that is they have a house to sell before they can buy something. 3 4 years ago, you just could not get those offers accepted. It was
No.
impossible. You had to get a bridge loan, which was more expensive, and try to bridge that gap between your selling and your buying. Now, because the market has cooled down a little bit, we can get those um, accepted, and sometimes we can get those accepted with concessions on top of that, and
Hmm.
then we can use that to buy down the interest rate, which is also helpful for a lot of buyers. So we're seeing a lot of that.
Yeah, and I think that especially, and that's where we can leverage things for a first-time home buyer because, if you as a first-time home buyer come in, you don't have to compete with selling your home. Plus, you can ask for seller concessions on top of that.
Yeah.
It opens up so many more possibilities. So that's why I'm excited about first-time home buyers saying, okay, let's get in now before the market gets hot again, where we're going to be, quite frankly, priced out of the market again.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, we both talk to a lot of first-time home buyers right now, and a lot of people are like, "Well, I want to wait for interest rates to go down. I want to wait for interest rates to go down." And I understand that because what we really want is a lower payment. But
Hmm.
the reality is the two things that are going to make a lower payment is either property values are going to go down or interest rates are going to go down or a combination therein. Well, we have so many people here in Northern Colorado moving in, and we have such a constraint on our supply that, it's a supply demand thing.
Yeah.
And we're not going to see property values go down in a substantial way in the near future. Like we've been underbuilding for the last 15 years. And so we're
Hmm.
going to continue to see issues with that. And so everybody's waiting for interest rates to go down to solve that problem. But the problem is with that logic is once interest rates go down, then demand is going to go up, which
Hmm.
is going to drive home values up and competition is up. And, we uh, remember what COVID was like. And when we were putting in offers and having to go, 20, 30, sometimes even 40,000 above asking price just to get an offer accepted,
Hmm.
that's hard to do.
Well, and I think I'm hearing rumblings and just, different surveys, statistics that I've seen, just talking with other people out there in the market, just generally. I think if we start getting into 5 point something, especially if we get to 5.5 or lower, then I think that's when just all of this pent up demand is just going to be released. And then I think
Yeah.
we're going to be back into over asking.
Yeah.
Maybe not lots, but I think we're going to be back
Yeah.
in that territory.
Well, it's just a hard situation. And my advice to buyers is like, I understand you want that lower payment, but that's the scenario that's going to happen when we
Hmm.
get there.
Yeah.
And as a real estate agent who had, I had a lot of first time home buyers during COVID, and I had some that needed the down payment assistance. And it was so frustrating getting those offers accepted. It was just,
Mm.
and it was heartbreaking for me because I had one client that I think we wrote 15 or 16 offers before we finally got one accepted.
Wow.
And I hated it as an agent because would have to call her and I would have to say, hey, you know what? We did everything we could, but it wasn't enough. Somebody else bought the house. And the reason we had issues is one, when we have to disclose that they're using down payment assistance, which makes the buyer look less qualified because, well, they are than somebody that doesn't need that. And the other thing that we saw a lot of that somebody that needed down payment assistance can't do is we saw a lot of what we would call an appraisal gap. And what
Right.
that is it's the difference. So if you said, all right, I'm going to put it in an offer for 500,000, but I'm going to say, we're going to do an appraisal gap of $10,000. That means if the appraisal comes in at 490, then the buyer's going to bridge that gap from 490 to 500 with cash. So they have to have additional cash on top of their down payment and closing costs to do that. And there's
Hmm.
not a lot of buyers, especially buyers, that will need down payment assistance. They just don't have the money to do that. And so this is the perfect market for those buyers if they can qualify, if they can afford that payment, and we can do some things to help with that. But, I think this is the market for them. And then, a year or maybe 2 years, I mean, who knows when rates will go down to 5.5%, but they get
Mhm.
there and the market goes bananas. These buyers, they already have a house. They don't need to buy something. They just sit there and then all of a sudden it's 5.5%. They call you and say, okay, James, let's refinance this thing and get a lower payment, you know?
Right.
And
But
there's no pressure, no competition to do that.
mhm. Well, and two, when you're refinancing, there might be a chance to also not only get a lower payment because of interest rate, but also maybe because values have gone up, get rid of mortgage insurance, which then
Mhm.
compounds the benefit.
Yep.
So a double win there.
Yep. Well, and if you wait long enough, home values will go up. I mean, we were
Yeah.
seeing during COVID, we were seeing there's one year we had about 20% appreciation,
Wow.
which is crazy. I mean,
Hmm.
I was having buyers move here from out of state, and a lot of them were like, well, let's rent something for a year or 6 months. And then I'm like, I would buy something. We are seeing so much appreciation right now that you
Hmm.
buy something and in a year you could turn around and sell that thing and you'll make money. It was kind of just a crazy season. And if we see that again,
Hmm.
you wait a year, refinance, you just got rid of mortgage insurance,
Yep.
you know. So
Yeah.
so we've kind of been dancing around the rate thing a little bit. Where are rates at today and where do you foresee them going at least in the foreseeable future?
Gotcha. Well, let me first preface with any projections of where interest rates going. Full transparency, my crystal ball is as foggy as everybody else's. So, and what I'm going to be leveraging really is what some of the quote unquote smart people are predicting and all that stuff. So, as far as where current mortgage rates are today, let me just make sure that we understand mortgage rates are driven by a couple things. What's your loan to value? What's your credit score? There's a couple factors that figure out what your specific interest rate's going to be. However, there is a great thing that I use on News Daily that kind of gives the average interest rate across the industry, across the nation. So I use that as my gauge of where things roughly are sitting today, generally speaking. And so here's what we have for today. On a 30-year fixed, this is a conventional loan, we're sitting roughly at 6.72. For an FHA, which is better, we're sitting at roughly a 6.22 as an average. Some companies are going to be a little higher, some companies might be a little bit lower, but roughly in that band. For a VA and FHA are usually fairly similar, and that's sitting at a 6.23. So that's where things are sitting today. If you're looking at jumbo loans are typically higher. So that is closer to the 7%, but that's kind of where things are sitting today.
And
Now,
it seems like most of the buyers that I've worked with typically go for a 30-year fixed rate, whether it's FHA, VA, conventional.
typically,
Is that a
yeah,
fair
that's a
statement?
fair statement. I have talked about 20-year or 15-year with a client or two, but when we contrast the payment, then are like, okay, let's do a 30-year now. When interest rates come down, that will refinance into a 15-year. Maybe our payments might be the same, but I just knocked off 12 years off my mortgage. So a lot of people are looking at that as a future strategy. But yes, generally it's a 30-year that people
Yeah,
are looking at.
that makes sense.
Yeah. Now, keep in mind for those who are using down payment assistance programs such as CHAFA or whatnot, those interest rates are going to be pretty much the same no matter which company offers those. And those are sitting at a decent rate today. They've just gone down a little bit over the last 2 days. So if I remember correctly, we're sitting at about uh, 6.375 for the FHA version of Jaffa, and there's some variations between that and the different programs, but that's actually sitting a lot better than it was about 3 months ago. So Now that you asked the question about where are interest rates going, and I think that's a question that's on everybody's mind. And right now, I think the challenge with predicting it is there is a lot of uncertainty out there in the market. Just a lot of where are things going. You've got the Israel-Iran thing going on. You've got Russia-Ukraine. So you got those geopolitical stuff. You've got the tariff stuff with Trump, and just trying to kind of reset the playing field there. And then you also got inflation. Where's inflation going? And the inflation and the tariff things are connected because, is tariffs going to drive up inflation? If it does, is it going to be a short term, long term thing? So there's a lot of things that the market is going, we just don't know.
Yeah.
So based on all of that, here's what I've got. There's three places that have updated their forecasts recently, and those are the Mortgage Banking Association, and then we've got the National Association of Realtors, and we've got Fannie Mae. So what MBA is saying is roughly by the end of the year, uh, or into Q4 of 2025, the average interest rate will be about 6.6. So pretty much roughly where we're sitting now, maybe just a tick lower. Now NAR is saying 6.4, but Fannie Mae is saying closer to 6.1. So, I mean, all of us are hoping that Fannie Mae is more right than MBA is, but that's roughly
Right.
what they're predicting. Now, they're also predicting what we might see kind of into next year, as far as things go. So the MBA is saying 6.5 in the first two quarters of 2026, and then 6.3 by the end of the year. NAR is saying more 6.1 by the end of 2026. Now, Fannie Mae is a little bit more optimistic and is saying 5.8 by the end of 2026. Again, you kind of see where that spread is and where people are predicting things, and there's a decent spread there. I like a little bit more NARS and Fannie Mae's for the end of 2026 as far as what they're predicting. Maybe
Hmm.
because I'm like to be optimistic, but they're a little bit more in sync than what we see with MBA. So we'll see who's right in the long run and
Yep.
all of that stuff.
Well, and the frustrating part, I feel like over the last, I don't know, for me, it's really been acutely over the last 2 or 3 years, is I've listened to a lot of quote unquote experts, and on most of them are just, they're wrong,
Yep.
and some of them horribly wrong. And it's nothing against them. It's just, like you mentioned, there's a lot of moving pieces to
Hmm.
this. And all it takes is a new world war or inflation to go through the roof, or drop to virtually nothing. A big change can happen, and it can throw all these predictions out the window.
Agreed.
So
Well, you throw on top of that, if we run into a recession, what impact is that gonna make? Now, traditionally, when you run into recession, they lower the Fed interest rate, which then lowers mortgage rates, and we'll see rates get better. But then again, who wants to go into a recession, that, especially one that's deep and long? Recessions are healthy, but we always
yeah,
hope that they're short and shallow. Um,
yeah,
but yeah, that will. Who knows when that's going to happen? It's not if, but when.
yeah. Well, and it's, yeah. I mean, we can go into the reasons for it, but when you pump a bunch of free money into the
Hmm.
economy, at some level, some time, you're going to have to pay for it. You know,
You are. Yep.
there's no such thing as a free lunch. And yeah. So, yeah. Well, and I mean, I always think when it comes to predicting real estate markets, and I think interest rates are probably the same, I can be fairly accurate and fairly good 3 to 6 months out
Hmm.
and 10 plus years out. It's between 6 months and, 9 years and 11 months. That's the buffer that it's really hard to predict those things because there could be so much change that really affects those things.
Yeah.
History is going to tell us what 10-year plus is going to look like. And we
Hmm.
can look at the economic data today and tell us what 6 months is going to look like. It's past there, it gets difficult.
Agreed. Agreed. Because there's so many variables that, quite frankly, you can't control. So,
Yeah. And you can't foresee either.
yeah.
I mean, it's like the whole tariff thing. It's one of those things where I'm like, I have a hard time. I know it's a polarizing subject,
Hmm.
and a lot of people are like, are you pro or against? And I'm like, I just don't see it as that black and white. I mean, I think yes, I am against typically more taxes. And so if the goal is to raise taxes, then I'm fundamentally opposed to it.
Hmm.
If the goal is to use it to put pressure on other countries to stabilize um, the trade and actually overall lower taxes, then it could be a good thing. But it's also predicated on the other country, and we're talking about people here. And
Yep.
it's like, how do you predict what those people are going to do?
It's hard.
I don't know. And
Yeah.
I just don't think that, we are equipped to really make accurate predictions on what that's going to look like down the road. And that's going to make a big factor with interest rates. Because when you listen to the
Hmm.
feds, and I know you do, when you listen to them talk, they're hyper focused on inflation,
Yes,
and
they
they
are.
want inflation, that core CPI inflation, to be at 2%. And it's just been really sticky, and it's gotten close. I mean, it's in the twos. It's just
Hmm.
not at two yet. And
Yep.
so and tariff thing, I mean, that's just adding additional cost to manufacturers, which is going to
Hmm.
raise prices, which in fact raises inflation. And so it has a big effect with it. So there's a lot of factors.
Yep. Agreed.
All right. So interest rates are still, and I hear a lot of people talk, a lot of lenders actually. I haven't heard you say this, but I've heard other lenders talk about like, well, historically rates are just not that high. And you go back to, I don't know, like the 80s, mid 70s and 80s where you had double digit interest rates. And I'm
Yeah.
like, well, that's true, but you have to take into account the affordability in that. And there's three things that really, well, really two things that affect affordability. One is going to be your monthly payment, right? Your house
Hmm.
payment. And
Hmm.
then two is going to be your income,
Right.
right? I mean, my monthly payment could be $10,000 a month, but if I'm making over $1 million a year, then it's affordable, right? It's not that
Correct.
big of a deal. But
Hmm.
if my income isn't really that high, but my payments are high, right? That's affordability. And that's where you go back to like the 80s, and the ratio between house prices and people's salary was like a 4-to-1 ratio.
Mm.
And in today's world, we're talking like a 6, 7, sometimes an 8-to-1 ratio between somebody's salary and the purchase price of a home. Like there's a much greater delta between what people make and what they're buying today, which is why interest rates make a bigger difference today than it did in the 80s.
Correct. And then you add on top of that, I think people's debt utilization is a lot more. So we're talking credit cards, car loans, and all of
Yeah.
that stuff back, 70s, 80s, even into the 90s. I think people didn't have quite as much consumer debt.
Yeah.
Now, when I take a look at that for a lot of people, it's surprising how much is
Yeah.
out there.
Well, I mean, it's all overall cost of living, right? If our
Yep.
salary isn't growing with the increase in cost of living, then we're going to have to pay for those things one way, shape, or form, or we're going to have to lower our standard of living, which, let's be honest, nobody wants to do. And
No.
it's really hard to do.
Yep.
I remember I used to work for a healthcare company here in town, and historically they would give us a 3%, sometimes a 3.5% raise every year,
Hmm.
which at the time we always considered that just a cost of living increase. Inflation is ideally at 2%. Um, and so 3% is just a little bit more than that. So your salary is actually growing a little bit more than
Hmm.
what your cost of living increase is. But anymore, you know, when you're just doing a 3% increase, you're losing money, working at that,
Well, and
unfortunately.
because of inflation, I think sometimes too companies can't afford to do what they traditionally did with a 3%, so it's actually less, which compounds the
Right.
problem.
Yeah. And that's the thing that's just hard with like the inflation game is it's not that the companies, I mean, there are greedy companies out there.
Hmm.
Sure. There
Yeah.
are greedy, I get, right? There are greedy people. But most companies that I have had the privilege of working with, they're not greedy. Their cost of doing business is going up, and so they
Hmm.
can't pay their employees more because they don't have the money to do it, right?
Yeah.
And so they're in a bind because they want to pay their employees more, but they can't.
Yeah.
You can only pay somebody so much before the whole company just goes bankrupt because well they're losing money.
Right.
All right, so let's refocus. Sorry, I'm going on a tangent here.
Yeah.
um, and so we talked interest rates. We kind of talked the people that we're seeing going out there. I'm seeing some interesting things that we haven't seen in the last at least the last 10 years of real estate. I mean, we're seeing a lot of houses on the market right now,
Hmm.
especially the last 3 months. There has been a ton of new listings hit the market. It's not back to like the 22 uh time frame, back during COVID, we were seeing tons of houses on the market. We're not seeing that. Um, but we are seeing more houses for sale than we did actually see back in 2022. And so a lot of people get confused on like, well, what does that mean? So we have more houses hitting the market, or we had more houses in 2022 hitting the market, but we're actually had less houses for sale in 2022. Well,
Hmm.
what does that mean? That means that there's more buyer demand, right? Because if a
Right.
house comes on, buyer buys it, well, that house is not available. We wouldn't consider that as inventory because a buyer already bought it.
Right.
In today's market, we're seeing fewer houses hit the market, but there's less demand. And so, because there's less demand, I'm looking here at Greeley, and for May of this year, last month, we had 234 houses available to buy here in Greeley. If I look at May of 22, we had 111 houses that were available to purchase. And
Hmm.
so we literally have twice as many houses today as we did 3 years ago. And so for a buyer, that's good news because now you have more houses to choose from,
Hmm.
which is great. Um, Now the obviously the difficult part for a buyer is your monthly payment is going to be more than it was 3 years ago, but the two kind of go hand in hand. And so if you can make it work, I think it makes more sense. The days on market, which basically means from the time a house hits the market, from the time that house gets under contract, it's been going up. In February, we saw 64 days, and then it kind of went down in April, and it's kind of going back up a little bit. Again, what does that really mean? That basically is our way of saying more houses are coming on the market, and there are fewer buyers ready to buy those houses. So supply demand, and there's less demand right now than there was, a few years ago. Um, Again, that's a good thing for a buyer. It's a good thing for a buyer, really, for two reasons. And we're seeing this, right? A buyer has more options. You can go look at more houses. It's taking
Hmm.
longer for those houses to get under contract, which is also a good thing for a buyer because now you can go look at a house and you can be like, you know what, let's go see this other house first. And you go look at another house. And then you can say,
Yep.
you know what, I want to sleep on this. I want to wait till after the weekend sometimes. And so you have more time to make a decision, which is nice. During
Yep.
COVID, that drove me crazy because it's like buyers had to make decisions, quick. In this market, you can take a little bit more time. You can make sure that your numbers are good with a lender before you buy something, which is also nice. The other thing is sellers are getting a little bit more desperate because we're used to getting offers within hours and maybe a couple days. And now it's taking, you know, better part of, a month sometimes before we get an offer. And so by then sellers are a little desperate. And so sellers are like, all right, let's work with you. Oh, you need some seller concessions. In other words, we're going to give you some money to buy our
Hmm.
house so that you, as James, as the lender, can take that money and buy down interest rates, can use it for closing costs, can do a whole bunch of creative things with that. Um, and so that's also a good thing for home buyers. When we look at sales price, because everybody, whether you're selling or you're buying, everybody gets fixated on what are the values doing right now. Um, and honestly, we're seeing a lot of fluctuation right now. However, home values have gone down a little bit, but
Hmm.
not in like a hugely substantial way. So if we compare in Greeley, a detached home, single family, in May of 22, that house sold for 472,000, a little bit more. Today, well, last month in May, it sold for 456,000. So even though, yes, we've slid down a little bit, it's not substantial, you
Right.
know. And understand, like, yeah, I mean, it's 20 grand, but you know, last month, April, it was up to 510,000 and then it dropped to 556. And we're always a month behind because we're looking at last month's data.
Hmm.
Um, so I don't know. I mean, I am seeing it go down, but just not in a substantial way, that would really make that much of a difference when it comes to the affordability aspect of it.
Yeah.
And so if I had to predict the market, this is just Jamie Eklund's foggy crystal ball here. I think we're going to see Greeley, northern Colorado as a whole. I think we're going to see values depreciate a little bit. I think we're going to continue to see home values trickle down, not in a substantial way, the sky is falling type thing. I don't think we're going to see that. But I do think we're going to see values trickle down unless interest rates come down and that creates more demand.
Hmm.
Um, right now there's just not a tremendous amount of demand. And there's still a lot of houses that are coming on the market. And so with that being said, I think values are going to slip a little bit. But that's just my
Yeah.
opinion. That's six
Do you,
months.
there you go. Do you think they're slipping down more so because we were kind of moving in that trajectory, as far as just prices and all that stuff go, and then kind of settling back to where they actually should have been? And you think there's a little bit of a reset going on, or do you just think that's just the seasonal ebbs and flows of things?
I mean, a huge part of it is seasonal. I do think, there's been a lot of people that I've worked with recently that have been waiting for rates. They had a house to sell, they have a lower mortgage there. And for whatever reason, they want to sell it, right? They either need to change location, they want a bigger house, whatever the factor is, they need to sell that house and they want to buy something and they're tired of waiting. And so a lot of people are coming out doing that, which creates a lot of supply out there. Now it also creates a buyer in this area,
Hmm.
and so people are buying. Um, I'm seeing a fair number of people. that are moving out of state. Not a crazy number, but I mean, I am seeing some people that are like, you know what, we're tired of Colorado, or our families from somewhere else, we're going to move there, or whatever. I mean, there's a lot of that goes on as well.
Okay. Do you think
But
people are also chasing affordability when they move out of state to a degree?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I went and looked at a house yesterday, actually. Is past clients. I've known this family for 6, 7 years. Great people, and they're moving to Kentucky. And we were looking at the house, and I was kind of giving them value, and we're going to list it probably around, I don't know, 425 to 415, somewhere around there. They haven't decided yet, but they already did a bridge loan over in Kentucky, and so they already have that place bought. And they showed it to me. It's like 4 acres, a gorgeous ranch style
Oh,
house.
wow.
House is twice as big, and they're buying it for 425. And I'm like, wow, man,
Wow.
I wish you could buy that here for 425.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Oh
Yeah.
man.
All they
Yeah.
have to deal with is the humidity now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's in a small community, and so your cost of living overall is going to be lower, but your income potential is probably also going to be lower, and so you just have to take those things into consideration. But that's just how it always is.
Yep. No, that makes sense.
So yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of what we're going to see over the next 6 months here in Greeley. It's nothing I'm really that worried about. It's just taking longer to sell houses.
Yeah.
And so when I was talking to this couple, I told them that, and I'm like, just prepare yourself. It's going to take a little bit longer.
Mhm.
And they're fine with that. They're like, look, we're in no hurry. We've got the bridge loan for 6 months. We got to get it sold before that, but
Yeah.
as long as we can do that, they're fine. So
Well, and I think if people are have the right expectations on that, both as a buyer and a seller, I think
yeah,
especially can make the right decisions, the right calls. You don't get desperate. You just make well executed and well planned decisions. And I think that's a good thing.
yeah, yeah. No, I 100% agree. The one mistake that I am seeing a lot of sellers making right now, because everybody wants to get the most money for their house possible.
Hmm.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I know I've talked to some people that criticize that, but there's nothing wrong with trying to get full value for a house, whether or a car, or you just want to sell your cell phone. You want to get what it's worth out of it. And there's nothing wrong with that,
Hmm.
you know. But a lot of times, what people are doing right now is they're trying to get just a little bit more for their house. And so they want to start high and work low. And that strategy is okay as long as you're aggressive. The problem is the market's sliding down a little bit. And so if you're
Hmm.
just sliding down right behind the market, you're always going to be behind the market. And ultimately, you're going to get a lot less for your house, because eventually you're just going to have to leapfrog in a big way. And you've chased the market down for, a few months.
Hmm.
I've got a couple that I'm working with. We've had their house on the market for 3 months, maybe 4 months. And they started high. I recommended starting lower, but they wanted to start high. They weren't in a hurry. Now they're kind of in a hurry. So they go to the price that I originally recommended. And I'm like,
That might now still be
that
too high.
price, that price has changed now. You
Yep.
know, now it's about 10,000 less than what I recommended, but because we were slow, we need to go down another 10,000, and now they're not willing to do that. So,
Mm.
it's a hard situation. But if you start out listing for the right price right out of the gate, ultimately you will actually get more for your money. You will actually sell it for more. But
And that seems counterintuitive, but it does when you sit back and think about it. When you put your best foot forward, where you
yeah,
get that immediate, kind of interest and all that stuff, yeah, you probably will get an offer faster. And typically if you get an offer in the first week, it's going to be people are going to be aggressive going, "Ooh, it's only been on the market for a week. I need to put my best foot forward as
Yep.
well." But if it's been on for 60 to 90 days, then people are like, "Well, what's wrong with the house?"
Right.
Or, "Ooh, I could really get a deal." And then they don't put their best foot forward.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's true. Um, yeah, I mean, if I look at the MLS and I'm looking at a property with some buyers, this happened earlier this week actually. I was talking to some buyers. We looked at this house. It was really good condition. They really liked the house. And they're like, well, what do we offer? And so I was looking at it. I was like, well, the house has been on the market for about 30 days. And they're like, yeah, we know, but they've also lowered the price since 30 days. I'm like, I know, but it's been on for 30 days.
Hmm.
So let's go in. And in this case, I was like, I recommend going in at $10,000 below asking. They wanted to be a little bit more aggressive than that. So we went in at 15, we went back and forth, and ultimately we settled for 10 below asking, you know. But, even though they had lowered it multiple times within that 30 days, we still got it 10 below asking where they were asking at that time, not where they
Right,
started.
right.
And so I think it was probably about 40,000 below their initial asking price.
Mm.
Um, I think they've probably started too high, and that's probably, just reading between the lines, that agent probably talked to the sellers, and the sellers probably wanted more, and so that's probably the strategy they went with.
Hmm.
Um, but it I think we got it probably below what the house itself is actually probably worth, just because it was listed too high at the beginning.
Gotcha.
So
Gotcha. So sometimes less is more, is what you're saying.
yeah, and like this couple that's moving to Kentucky, what I told them is I was like, we need to be aggressive right out of the gate. Even though you have a little bit of time, if the market's sliding down, it's going to continue to slide down for the next 2 or 3, 4 months. You don't want to wait for 4 months because the market's going to be lower than it is today. And
Hmm.
so sometimes we just get aggressive today, get something under contract, and get the house sold. It'll be better for them in the long run.
Right.
So. All right. So that's kind of my crystal ball for the real estate market. You gave your crystal ball, and obviously with both of these, every situation is different, right? And I know lenders like you, James, you're super careful about quoting rates because you can't quote a rate because there's too many factors. Everybody's situation is different. And so if
Correct.
somebody really wants to know what their situation qualifies for, they need to talk to you. And if somebody wants to know what their house is worth, they really need to talk to me because some houses are still flying off the market and some houses are sitting even longer than others. And so every situation is going to be a little bit different. That being said, this James, in your opinion, is it
Hmm.
the right time for everybody to buy a house?
Not for everybody. For some people, it is the absolute best time to buy a house. And for some people, it's the absolute worst time to buy a house.
So, who are the people right now that should be buying a house?
That's almost a dangerous question to
Yeah.
answer. Um, Generally speaking, as far as things go, um, people that should be looking at buying a house are the people in the house that they're looking at fits their budget. At the end of the day, that's the most important thing. Now, if you're looking for a demographic that would should be considering it more than others, honestly, I think it's first-time homebuyers, mainly because of the competition factor. If we wait for interest rates to get down to that, let's just call it 5.5, and we've had housing costs appreciate over, the next year or two, then some of the savings of that lower interest rate are going to be offset by a higher price point. But if you jump in now or in the next little bit and it fits with your budget, you're building your own equity. We can refinance at a lower interest rate. So, what you're hopefully looking at is your worst case scenario with options for the future. And this is before, if market gets too hot, well, might be into over asking. And if you don't have a lot of money saved down, which most first time home buyers don't, then you might be again priced out of the market.
Yeah.
So,
And if I honestly thought, like, if I was looking at all the data and I knew supply demand, our supply was way too high and demand was never going to catch up, and I thought that home values were going to go down, then I would probably disagree with you. I would
mhm,
say, nope, first time home buyers just need to wait, let prices go down, right? But they're not going to do that. I just don't see, other than something crazy happening right now, I just
mhm,
don't see it. I really, really don't see it. And if values don't go down and they're going up, then if you can afford it today, and that's a big if, but if you
yeah,
can afford it today, then buying a house today is probably going to be your best shot. Because as we looked at the predictions from the MBA and NAR and all the rest, like they're not predicting interest rates are going to go down in a substantial way in the near future. It's going to be
no,
years.
yeah. And we
So
almost want it to go down slow and steady. We
yeah,
don't want big shocks to the system. If you
yeah,
have a big shock to the financial system, then you're all of a sudden you're going to generate a yo-yo effect, and who knows where that's going to go.
yeah,
So slow and steady wins the race in this one.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And from a macro perspective, that's 100% true. Individual, like me, I want
Yeah.
it to go to 3% tomorrow, then,
Oh,
it'd be great. Right. But from a
agreed.
macroeconomic
Yeah.
perspective, yeah,
Yeah.
you're 100% correct. We need some slow changes, slow movements. So
Agreed.
who shouldn't buy a house right now?
Now, well, going back to my original thought, if it doesn't fit within your budget, definitely don't. The other thing is if you feel like you're going to buy a house today and then sell in the next, let's say, 2 to 3 years,
Yeah.
you need to have that time to allow your equity to grow. Now, the caveat is, you have 50% down because you're buying and selling, not as big of a deal. But if you're a first time home buyer with very limited down payment or using down payment assistance, but you think you're going to sell your home in the next 2 or 3 years, don't buy now because you
Yeah.
might be underwater at that point, or there's a greater chance that you might be. And that is not a recipe for success.
Yeah. Well, and nobody wants to lose money on a house.
No.
And we're told that you won't ever lose money on a house, but that's not true. Because let's be honest, it's expensive to buy and sell houses.
Yeah, it
And
is.
when you're selling a house, there's a substantial amount of closing costs that go into selling that house. And so that house needs to have appreciated, um, probably 7%,
Mm,
maybe a little bit more before you're going to cover just the fees involved. And so if your house appreciated 7% in 2 years, you're thinking, great, I just made 7%. It's like, no, you're going to give that back in fees. And
yeah.
so if you're planning on moving in 2 years, I agree with you, then let's just rent something. Because I mean, in
Mm,
2 years, how much money are you going to pay down towards the principal of your loan? Not very much,
no.
and I mean, there may be an argument there that, well, yes, but you're paying, $2,500 or whatever a month in rent. And, this is protecting some of that cash. But I don't know. I mean, the additional liability and stuff you take on from being a homeowner, 2 years, just rent.
Yeah.
If that's the case you're in, it
Mhm.
just doesn't make sense. Now, I mean, if we knew what 2 years was going to do, and we knew in a year home values were going to skyrocket because interest rates really go down, then I could tell you, yeah, buy something. But I
Mhm.
can't make that promise. I don't think anybody can make that promise right now. So
No.
yeah. So yeah, if you can't afford it, and you keep using the term, if it doesn't work within your budget, and speaking for you a little bit, talking about the difference between what you're approved for from a lender and what actually works within your budget could be different, correct?
Correct. Yes. Everybody spends their money differently. For example, some people like to go on a lot of vacations. That's going to have a cost to go
Yeah.
along with it that other people don't have. Some people send their kids to private school. That doesn't show up on your debt to income calculations. Some people like to go out and eat a lot. That's going to affect. So everybody's budget is different. And I always tell people, just because I can get you qualified for it doesn't mean it's the right thing for you.
Yeah.
So I always encourage people, sit down, do your budget. How do you spend your money now? And, plan accordingly.
Yeah. No, I think that's good advice. I tell my buyers the same thing. I tell them, a house won't make you happy, but it could
Hmm.
make you miserable.
Yep, 100%.
And a house, I just work with too many people and I see it. And yeah, it's exciting to go buy a new house. And there's going to be a moment of time where you're like, I just can't believe we're buying this house. It's amazing. But the reality is like, it's just a shell that you do life in. You
Hmm.
want a shell that's comfortable, that, you know, is conducive for your lifestyle. I get that, but it's just a shell.
Yeah.
But if your payments are through the roof and you're having to eat ramen noodles every meal just to like survive, like that is going to just crush you. And you don't want that.
No, you
So
don't.
make sure you know what your affordability really is. And if you can't afford it realistically, and you're going to be there for more than 2 years, it's not a bad time to buy something.
Right.
Any other scenarios that you can think of people maybe who shouldn't be buying something right now?
Um, Nothing that from a big picture stands to mind beyond maybe, people that are looking to sell and buy and that might be underwater. Yeah, they'll just might need to just park for a little bit.
Hmm.
Or if people that are anticipating a major life change that might be coming up, job change, going back to school, something of that general nature where they'll see a shift in income or potential big shift in income, which would cause some
Yeah.
affordability issues. Those are some things where you might want to be more conservative than risky in that standpoint.
Yeah. Yeah. I was talking to a guy a few weeks ago and he's like, yeah, I think I might be losing my job, but maybe I should look into buying a house. And I'm like, ooh, if you think you're going to be losing your job, you might not want to buy a house right now because, well, yeah, you could buy it, but can you make that mortgage payment? Because they're not going to
Hmm.
just keep or let you continue living there for free, you
No,
know? And nobody wants to see somebody go through that process of foreclosure.
no,
So,
no.
yeah, no, I think that's smart. I think that's good. Um, a lot of people right now that I do see actually being a good time to buy are the people who need to sell a house and then buy a house. And I'm seeing a lot of people that they own their house outright. They're going to buy
Hmm.
their next house with cash. There's a lot of those people right now, and you can get contingent offers, like I've already mentioned, you can get those accepted where you
Hmm.
couldn't 3 years ago. And so now there's a lot of those people coming out because now's a good opportunity for them to sell and buy. They're more patient, you know, and so they're out there.
Well, if you don't have to worry about the interest rates, but you also can get a good deal because you're going to be a cash buyer and you need to
Yeah.
make that change, upgrade, downgrade. Now's yeah, you're right. And now is a good time for them.
Yep. It really is. And I'm seeing a few investors do the same thing where they
Hmm.
have a property that they're not thrilled about. I have one of them right now that they just don't like the location. Honestly,
Hmm.
it's too far away from them and they just don't want to keep driving there. And so they're selling that one and then they're buying something closer. And it's a 1031 exchange and it's also uh conditional, you know, and we're still able to get that done.
There
So
you go.
cool. All right. Well, it's not the right time for everybody to buy, but if you can afford it, especially if you're a first time home buyer. Rents, I think rents are stabilizing a little bit from what I've heard from a lot of my property management friends. There's more
Yeah.
rentals out there. There's less demand for rentals. At least here in Greeley, I think there's been a lot of creation of rentals in the last couple of years. That's kind of softened that market a little bit.
Hmm.
Um, but it's still high. I mean, for a house, paying 2,500 bucks is fairly normal, I think, for a detached house to rent it. Um, so chances are, if that does go down, it's only going to go down a little bit, and then it's going to pick back up, and so it'll continue to rise. And so if you can still get in and buy something, it's still a good idea.
Agreed.
All right. Any final thoughts? Anything that I'm missing?
I
Overall
just think
picture.
I just think really reiterating the fact that every situation is different. So we
Yep.
have kind of these general ideas of where things might be heading and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, sitting down with someone and just talking about the details and what it specifically could look like for that individual is very helpful. Whether you're wanting to make a move now, 6 months, 2 years, or whether you just want some more data to figure out what does it need to be for you, sitting
Yep.
down and talking would
Yep.
be very beneficial.
Yep. I think ultimately, like we look at like some generalities, but you're right. Every situation is different, and
Mhm.
even if you are a first time home buyer that can't afford it, it still might not be the right time for you. And part of what we do, our jobs, is sitting people like that down and just processing, saying, "Here's what we see. Here's what your numbers are going to look like. Here's what we could do."
Mhm.
And then we help them make decisions, you know, based on their scenario and their circumstance.
Right.
I agree 100%. All right. Well, it's been a pleasure speaking with you, James. Um, if anybody needs to get a loan, give James a call. He would love to help you. And if nothing else, he'd just love to have the conversation with you and help you process these things and, see if it is the right time for you to buy a house, or maybe it's not. That's okay.
Yeah, love to chat for sure.
All right, James, we'll talk to you later.
All right, thanks, Jamie.